In arguably the most controversial chapters of Job, apologists have noted the book's apparent discussion of what they say can only be described as descriptions of dinosaurs. Speaking in Job 40, God gives an account of his greatest land animal, the behemoth. Look at behemoth, which I made along with you, and which feeds on grass like an ox. What strength it has in its loins, what power in the muscles of its belly. Its tail sways like a cedar, the sinews of its thighs are close knit. Its bones are tubes of bronze, its limbs like rods of iron. It ranks first among the works of God, yet its maker can approach it with his sword. The hills bring it their produce, and all the wild animals play nearby. Under the lotus plants it lies, hidden among the reeds in the marsh. The lotuses conceal it in their shadow, the poplars by the stream surround it. A raging river does not alarm it. It is secure, though the Jordan should surge against its mouth. Can anyone capture it by the eyes, or trap it and pierce its nose? Apologists note that prior to the 19th century, the term dinosaur did not exist, so while the word is not used in the book of Job, the description of the creature behemoth certainly sounds very much like a massive, plant-eating sauropod. The picture is made complete by referring to the enormous animal's tail, which sways like a cedar, the cedar being a very large tree in the Near East.
Boys and girls, I believe that the Bible is the history book of the universe. What do I think the Bible is? It's what?
The history book of the universe.
The Bible is the history book of the universe. If you believe that man and dinosaurs did live together, like it says in Genesis, then how's come we can't find the word dinosaur in the Bible? Hey, can I look in the Bible and find the word jet airplane? No, it's a brand new word. Can I look in the Bible, boys and girls, and can I find the word computer? No, it's a brand new word, and the word dinosaur is a brand new word too.
So what are you teaching the kids?
Well, I'm teaching the kids about the authority of Scripture. What does the Bible say about dinosaurs? A lot of people are surprised that the Bible would even mention anything about dinosaurs because we had the preconceived idea that dinosaurs died out millions of years ago before people, and I'm convinced beyond the shadow of a doubt that that's not true.
Let's look at the Bible. Let's look in the book of Job. Turn to chapter 40. In verse 15 we're told of a mighty creature that Job must have known. In the jungle of the reeds and ferns, Behemoth made his home. Behemoth is a dinosaur is he. He eats grass as an ox, his tail's like a cedar tree. His bones are strong as bars of iron, he's cheap in the ways of God. Could Behemoth be a dinosaur, a mighty
But the behemoth is not the only large creature described in the book of Job. Chapter 41 paints the picture of a ferocious animal with scales like armor and terrifying teeth, so fearsome that even men's weaponry could not penetrate its body. This was the creature known as Leviathan. Can you pull in Leviathan with a fishhook or tie down its tongue with a rope? Can you put a cord through its nose or pierce its jaw with a hook? Will it keep begging you for mercy? Will it speak to you with gentle words? Will it make an agreement with you for you to take it as your slave for life? Can you make a pet of it like a bird or put it on a leash for the young women in your house? Will traders barter for it? Will they divide it up among the merchants? Can you fill its hide with harpoons or its head with fishing spears? If you lay a hand on it, you will remember the struggle and never do it again. Any hope of subduing it is false. The mere sight of it is overpowering. No one is fierce enough to rouse it. Who then is able to stand against me? Who has a claim against me that I must pay? Everything under heaven belongs to me. I will not fail to speak of Leviathan's limbs, its strength, and its graceful form. Who can strip off its outer coat? Who can penetrate its double coat of armor? Who dares open the doors of its mouth, ringed about with fearsome teeth? Its back has rows of shields tightly sealed together. Each is so close to the next that no air can pass between. They are joined fast to one another. They cling together and cannot be parted. Its snorting throws out flashes of light. Its eyes are like the rays of dawn. Flames stream from its mouth. Sparks of fire shoot out. Smoke pours from its nostrils as from a boiling pot over burning reeds. Its breath sets coals ablaze, and flames dart from its mouth. Strength resides in its neck. Dismay goes before it. The folds of its flesh are tightly joined. They are firm and immovable. Its chest is hard as rock, hard as a lower millstone. When it rises up, the mighty are terrified. They retreat before its thrashing. The sword that reaches it has no effect, nor does the spear, or the dart, or the javelin. Iron it treats like straw, and bronze like rotten wood. Arrows do not make it flee. Sling stones are like chaff to it. A club seems to it but a piece of straw. It laughs at the rattling of the lance. Its undersides are jagged potsherds, leaving a trail in the mud like a threshing sledge. It makes the depths churn like a boiling cauldron, and stirs up the sea like a pot of ointment. It leaves a glistening wake behind it. One would think the deep had white hair. Nothing on earth is its equal, a creature without fear. It looks down on all that are haughty. It is king over all that are proud. Clearly, this creature is like nothing alive today. From these passages, some apologists conclude that Leviathan was in fact some sort of prehistoric marine reptile. Certain apologists, those who believe the earth to be between 6,000 to 10,000 years old, known as creationists, ask how the author of Job could possibly have made such stunningly accurate descriptions of creatures which seem to be of prehistoric origin, if, as modern evolutionary science maintains, such animals died out tens of millions of years before the appearance of human beings on the planet. Such descriptions, these creationists maintain, are proof dinosaurs and other ancient animals did indeed live with man, and that the earth is far younger than modern scientists suppose. Contrary to the apologists' position, however, most scholars commenting on the book of Job believe the author of these passages was describing creatures not quite as exotic as dinosaurs. For example, as Marvin H. Pope notes in the Anchor Bible's commentary on Job, the descriptions of Behemoth and Leviathan are indeed vivid and detailed enough to convince most moderns that the creatures are the two most impressive of Egypt's numerous fauna, the ponderous hippopotamus and the extremely fierce and dangerous crocodile. Behemoth, for example, has many of the characteristics of the Nile hippopotamus, which leads so many commentators to conclude that this is indeed what is being described. Klein's notes in the World Biblical Commentary, characteristics of the hippopotamus that coincide with Behemoth are that they are both herbivorous, amphibious, remarkable strength of their body, with solid bones. They live in swamps, reeds, and seek shade. However, some commentators have suggested that perhaps the author was engaging in more than a bit of hyperbole when describing the hippopotamus and crocodile. Others suggest the creatures were purely mythological, with similarities found in Ugaritic texts. John Hartley observes in his commentary on Job, "The identification of the behemoth and leviathan is disputed, ranging from earthly creatures to mythological monsters. As earthly beasts, they are identified as the hippopotamus and the crocodile respectively. Realistic, detailed descriptions keep the portrait from becoming purely mythical. Nevertheless, into the factual description the author skillfully blends fanciful metaphors drawn from mythic accounts of monsters in order that these beasts may represent both mighty terrestrial creatures and cosmic forces." It is certainly not beyond the realm of possibility that ancient people, not necessarily the author of Job or any other ancient Hebrew, might very well have discovered a fossil or collection of fossils of prehistoric animals and, like modern scientists, imagined what the creatures may have been like in life. These imaginations, built around the fossilized remains, may have worked their way into the Jobian narrative. Since the discovery of dinosaur fossils and their identification by modern scientific methods, some biblical apologists themselves may have similarly worked these massive beasts into their apologetics regarding the Book of Job, perhaps even being influenced by Hollywood.
Look there. 2 points off the port bow.
But what of the assertion that Job was actually describing a dinosaur? Does it stand up under deeper scrutiny? Many apologists assert that the behemoth was likely something similar to a brachiosaur.
Come to chapter 40. God said, "Behold now behemoth." Well, what on earth is a behemoth? Well, whatever it was, Job could behold it. Because God never tells you to do something you can't do. See, God would not say, "Behold now behemoth," if he could not behold now behemoth. That's deep theology, I know, okay, but think it through, all right? Now, some reference Bibles say behemoth is probably the elephant or hippopotamus. Oh, that is ludicrous. I believe behemoth is the long-necked dinosaur. Now, there are 13 different long-necked dinosaurs, okay? There's the brachiosaur, the apatosaur, the cetosaur. He's got the big seat, okay?
And while apologists like to focus exclusive attention on the tail like a cedar verse,
it says, "He moveth his tail like a cedar." Now, hold on a minute. His tail is like a cedar tree. Have you ever seen an elephant's tail? I mean, would that remind you of a cedar tree? Or a hippo tail? Not like a cedar tree. Now, brachiosaurus tail, yeah, that's a little more like a cedar tree than the rest of them, okay?
such apologists cannot simply choose to ignore the other descriptions of this animal, or lack of descriptions. Apologists need to at least read the passage once before deciding to comment on it.
By the way, you preachers, if you're going to preach on a passage, at least read it once before you preach on it, okay? Yeah, all right.
The verse regarding the behemoth's tail is not necessarily describing its size, but what the animal does with it. He moves his tail like a cedar. Cedars, being trees, can wave and bend in the wind. However, if Behemoth was indeed a hippopotamus, where is the description of its mouth? The hippo is known for its large mouth and massive teeth. If Behemoth were a hippopotamus, why did the author fail to mention this most obvious feature? But if Behemoth were a brachiosaur, as the apologists assert, where is the description of its enormously long neck? Clearly, this would have been a feature of such an animal every bit as conspicuous as the mouth of a hippopotamus. The author of Job also describes the behemoth as living in a swampy, aquatic environment. But such an enormous beast would not have survived in such conditions, its weight sinking its body into the muck. It certainly would not have been delighted under the reeds or lotus plants. Brachiosaurus bones found in the western U.S. provide evidence that these animals lived entirely on dry land. The author of Job also states that Behemoth feeds on grass like an ox. However, sauropods like the brachiosaur had more in common with modern giraffes than they did with an ox, pulling leaves off the tops of trees and sometimes eating the entire tree. They could not chew like an ox, but instead swallowed their food whole. With bodies around 65 feet long and weighing nearly 20 tons, it would have been inefficient for these giant sauropods with their relatively tiny heads to process food in their mouths. It is very clear from the description of Behemoth in the book of Job that it is not describing anything like a giant brachiosaur. The name Behemoth refers in the Hebrew to livestock, like cattle and oxen, and, as mentioned earlier, is described as eating grass like an ox. It possessed incredible strength, so much so that God makes a point of suggesting that unless one had divine power, it was impossible for man to come near it. It is also stated that Behemoth was the first of God's works, recalling the state of chaos out of which creation took place in the book of Genesis. Since suggestions that Behemoth was either a hippo or a dinosaur ultimately aren't convincing, it is important to place the description of this creature and its companion Leviathan in its native ancient Near Eastern context. Of particular interest here is the Baal myth, or Baal cycle. This series of ancient stories was written on tablets dating to the mid-14th century BCE and were discovered in the late 1920s in modern-day Syria at Ras Sharma, an ancient port city of Ugarit. In these ancient Ugaritic texts, there is mentioned a creature alternately known as Ars, or El's calf Attic. This was a great bovine-like beast, which was the companion of the Canaanite god El. In the myth, a rival god, Anat, claims to have defeated this creature. I smote Ars, beloved of El. I put an end to El's calf, Attic. Ars is also said to have spent time in water, just as Behemoth in the Joban narrative. It is possible the author of Job borrowed from this older mythology the imagery of Attic, the calf of El, and transposed it into the Behemoth of his own story. The evidence for just such an influence is made stronger when considering Job's Leviathan. While most scholars conclude that the creature described in Job 41 is a highly mythologized crocodile, apologists for the scientific accuracy of Job conclude the animal being described was something more like a Kronosaurus or some other plesiosaur. As the late apologist Henry M. Morris explains,
mentioned in Job chapter 41 a marine dinosaur, Leviathan. It's also called in Isaiah 27 the dragon that lives in the sea. And in Psalm 104 it talks about Leviathan playing out in the ocean deeps. This was evidently a marine dinosaur.
Major problems exist, of course, with identifying the biblical Leviathan with an ancient marine reptile. Plesiosaurs, like Kronosaurus, did not have armor-like scales, meant to protect the animal from swords, spears, darts, and javelins. These creatures are believed to have had smooth skin, like that of a whale, hardly scales tightly sealed together, each so close to the next that no air could pass between them. Plesiosaurs did not have undersides jagged like potsherds, and they lived their lives in the sea, so that it's doubtful such a creature would have left a trail in the mud like a threshing sledge. In addition to all of these inequalities between a plesiosaur and the biblical Leviathan is the simple fact that there is absolutely no evidence that any creature in the history of the earth ever spewed fire and flames from its nostrils and mouth, as so vividly described in the book of Job. Some apologists will try to deflect skepticism about an animal that can breathe fire by pointing to the bombardier beetle, a small insect which can produce as a defense mechanism a chemical reaction of very high temperature from its underside.
It is chemically possible to do this, to mix chemicals together and they burn their enemy. That's what bombardier beetle does. You can get World Book Encyclopedia, Science Here 81 edition, and read about the bombardier beetle. They've got this beetle glued down with a drop of yellow wax on his back and a paper clip stuck in there. He's clamped into a ring stand, so he'll cooperate for the photographer. And then they reached up with the tweezers and pinched his front leg. The beetle is thinking, man, there's that ant. He's biting my leg again. Those guys never learn. This beetle has a cannon back near his hind end. He swings it around at the enemy and blasts his enemy with 212-degree chemicals, the temperature of boiling water.
However, the chemical reaction of the bombardier beetle does not produce flashes of light, flames, or sparks. Clearly, the book of Job is describing the production of fire, which is not at all comparative to the foul-smelling, caustic chemical reaction produced by the bombardier beetle, no matter how much apologists try to stretch the comparison. But if apologists want to continue to push for a literal interpretation of Leviathan spewing smoke and fire, they should be pressed to explain how God performs the same act. In Psalm 18, Yahweh is described in much the same way as Leviathan in Job 41. The psalmist, in distress, cried for help from the Lord, and when God appeared, smoke rose from his nostrils, consuming fire came from his mouth, burning coals blazed out of it. He parted the heavens and came down. Dark clouds were under his feet. Was God's consuming fire, issuing forth from his mouth with smoke streaming from his nostrils, a heretofore unknown chemical process like that of the bombardier beetle? Or are such apologetic explanations reserved only for those items which support a specific creationist agenda? Leviathan is referred to elsewhere in biblical literature as a serpent with the ability to coil as a snake, something one couldn't say of a plesiosaur. Psalm 74 refers to Leviathan as having multiple heads. To date, no ancient or modern marine creature has been found fitting such a bizarre description, but just such an animal is found in the same older Ugaritic mythological texts as is mentioned the Attic, calf of El, which may have been the model for the biblical behemoth. On one of the tablets upon which the myth was written, a creature known as Lotan is described. When you smite Lotan, the fleeing serpent, finish off the twisting serpent, the close coiling one with 7 heads. The connection with the biblical Leviathan is clear. As stated in the dictionary of the Old Testament, Leviathan appears 6 times in the Old Testament and has the Ugaritic cognate Lultan. The usage of Leviathan is associated with the sea, including the image of Yahweh dividing the sea and controlling the rivers with his strength. In addition, Leviathan is used in conjunction with the serpent, as well as the dragon that lives in the sea. In addition, Leviathan's description as a twisting and multi-headed serpent that is associated with the sea and has been subjugated by God is more than reminiscent of the twisting serpent with 7 heads defeated by Baal in conjunction with their battles against the sea god Yam in the Ugaritic corpus. But there is even more. Just as Behemoth and Leviathan are mentioned together in the book of Job, the Ugaritic texts place together the Ars, or Attic, calf of El, and the coiled serpent or dragon. The important passages read, "Surely I lifted up the dragon, and smote the crooked serpent, the tyrant with 7 heads. I smote Ars, beloved of El. I put an end to El's calf, Attic." And, "In the sea are Ars and the dragon." So here Ars and the dragon are paired together in the sea, just as Behemoth is said to have lived in and near water, and Leviathan in the depths. Thus, these parallels strongly suggest that Behemoth derives from the Ugaritic creature named Ars, or El's calf Attic, which was paired with Leviathan, or the dragon of the sea. These are chaos monsters, existing at the beginning of creation. This isn't so much borrowing the mythology of another culture by the biblical authors, but instead borrowing certain mythological imagery and using it for their own purposes. Nevertheless, the fact that the author of Job may have believed these monsters were literal should not be easily dismissed. There simply is not a reasonable way to read the Joban descriptions of Behemoth and Leviathan and conclude that these biblical creatures were examples of a dinosaur and enormous marine reptile, respectively. To do so is to ignore clear verses which are inconsistent with such animals, and to ignore the broader ancient Near Eastern mythological literature from which these creatures are derived. Ignoring some verses in Scripture while emphasizing others in order to promote a particular view is standard practice of biblical apologetics, however. Clearly, the beasts of Job 40 and 41 are mythological, even if their descriptions are remarkably vivid and detailed. The animals were meant by the author to help describe the power and sovereignty of Yahweh. The author of Job was using these animals to drive a particular point home to his audience. If Job is unable to even approach these mighty creatures of Yahweh, which only the deity can control, how can Job have the audacity to approach and question God himself? There is certainly no amazing scientific accuracy in the description of these animals, and even less can they stand as evidence that human beings and dinosaurs once lived together on the planet.
Flintstones, meet the Flintstones.